Welcome to a celebration of Nantucket Sound, our monthly webinar series, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm your host, Audra Parker. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit environmental organization based in Hyannis on the Cape, and our mission is the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, the body of water that lies between Cape Cod and the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. And hopefully we'll have an image here, yes. And that's particularly important because Nantucket Sound represents a rare instance where you have split jurisdiction between federal waters in the center and state waters that run 3 miles from the shorelines of Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. So the state waters are part of a Massachusetts ocean sanctuary system and are protected, while the federal waters in the center are not protected. So for several years now, we have been seeking a National Historic Landmark designation for the entirety of Nantucket Sound as one single ecosystem. And this leverages a 2010 determination by the federal government that recognized that Nantucket Sound is what's called a traditional cultural place because of its importance to the Wampanoag people. And as such, it's already eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places as a sacred tribal site. But a National Historic Landmark designation is the highest level of historic protection and leverages that earlier determination. So we are seeking that National Historic Landmark designation to recognize and protect the entirety of Nantucket Sound, and to protect traditional uses like recreation and fishing while making uses such as development very difficult, if not impossible. And in support of that, we've built a broad coalition. We have chambers of commerce across the Cape and Islands. We have fishing groups. We have historic preservation groups, thousands of individuals, municipalities across the Cape and Islands that are all in support of the need to protect Nantucket Sound through this designation as a National Historic Landmark. The Celebration of Nantucket Sound, or the ACONS series, presents a lot of different speakers discussing aspects of Nantucket Sound, why it's such a special place, and why it is worthy of protection. So tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Sarah Bois. She's the Director of Research and Conservation at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. And tonight she's going to discuss coastal grasslands of Nantucket and Nantucket Sound. And just a few words about her background, her impressive background. Sarah's a plant ecologist and received her PhD from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Connecticut. She is the vice chair for the town of Nantucket's Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee and the chair of the Nantucket Invasive Plant Species Committee, all tongue twisters. Finally, Sarah teaches coastal ecology on Nantucket and is the co-founder of the annual Nantucket Climate Change Summit. So I'm very excited to have you here, Sarah, and hear what you have to say. And I will pop off in a second. And if I'll come back at the end of Sarah's presentation to take any questions. So if people from the audience have questions throughout, you can just write them in. And when Sarah's done with her amazing presentation, I'll come back and facilitate a Q&A. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Audra, for that generous introduction. I am very happy to be here tonight. I am, hopefully the light does well for me as we continue on the evening. I know we're at that sunset time, so hopefully it doesn't get too dark. But yeah, we're gonna have a nice chat today about Sandplain Grassland habitats and how Nantucket Sound is instrumental in their formation and protection.
Okay, so I will leave you and I will pop back when you're at the end of your presentation for the
Great.
questions. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, I am going to share my screen and get into presentation mode. Great. So hopefully everyone is seeing our presentation tonight. We're going to be talking about our grasslands, our coastal grassland habitats. They're globally rare habitat, and I'm going to convince you by the end of this talk that you love these grasslands as much as I do. And they do need protection and they need management to be maintained as they are. So this is meant to be a general talk. We have lots of research and work that goes into these grasslands broadly on Nantucket and beyond. So I'm hoping that this generates some questions for you, some interest in this habitat type. But we're going to have, kind of an easygoing night with some beautiful pictures. Especially as I think tomorrow is the first day of spring, and we are a little bit glum here still in Nantucket. We don't have anything blooming or budding just yet, so hopefully some beautiful pictures of grassland habitat in its full glory, lots of nice colors will kind of inspire us for our spring and summer growing season. So, as Audra said, I'm Sarah Bois. I'm the Director of Research and Conservation at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. You'll also see this logo for the Sandplain Grassland Network. I'm one of the committee chairs, or not chairs, the committee members for our Sandplain Grassland Network. And I'll mention that a few times. And that's a broad network of people that work in Northeast coastal grasslands. So to kind of put us in perspective for Nantucket Sound, this little arrow is where we are at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. We're out on the western end of Nantucket. And it might be funny to come to a talk about Nantucket Sound that's really focused on upland grassland habitats. But I really want to frame this and how these grasslands were created and how Nantucket Sound is hugely influential, especially on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. And while these grasslands occur in many different areas along the coast, and I'll show you a few different maps, my focus, of course, is Nantucket, but especially the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. So just to give you a quick background before we get into the grasslands, the Linda Loring Nature Foundation is a nonprofit land trust out on Nantucket Island on the western end. In this map below, the yellow boundary is our map. We focus on research, education, and outreach of our community, stewardship actions, so taking care of the land. You'll hear some of the actions that we've taken to take care of the land now or tonight. But then we do different aspects of research to focus on to learn how we best manage our habitats and the flora and fauna that are found on the property. So we have 275 acres of open space. It is open for passive recreation. We have a trail system, so if you are on Nantucket, or if you find yourself on Nantucket at all in the coming year, our trails are open sun up to sundown, 365 or 364. We're generally closed on 4th of July, but we welcome people to come to the property. And this map, this colorful map, is just a amalgamation of our habitat types. I kind of smushed some of the different habitat types together, but basically what I want you to look at is the pink line is our open trail that's open to everyone. And the green in this map is our Sandplain Grassland and coastal heathland habitat. They're sometimes discussed interchangeably because the species complex are really similar for both grasslands and heathlands. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the plants in a minute. But basically, for our property, you can see there's diversity of habitat types as you move from the east and the west of the property, but more than half of our property is grassland and heathland complex. And so this is a habitat we focus on a lot as land managers and stewards of this landscape. So what is a grassland? I'm going to come up a few different times. First of all, I just love showing pictures of the grasslands, especially when I'm, in my office in March, and it's not as fun as some of these pictures of peak growing season. So this is just a first glimpse. I'm going to go over some of the other species later, but this is one of our Sandplain grassland habitats on Nantucket. This grassland picture on the left-hand side, it's actually not Linda Loring Nature Foundation. This is Smooth Hummocks, which is owned by the Nantucket Land Bank. But this was kind of at a peak time in late summer. So I think this was either late August or early September. There's a lot of rare species in this picture. And I'll, point out some of the species as we go along. But this is kind of what we're looking at. We say Sandplain grassland, but it's actually a diversity of different types of plants. Some of the things that we see in the late summer fall are like New England blazing star, which is a species of concern. We see Sandplain blue-eyed grass, another species of concern in our state. And then it's also host to a lot of different rare birds that are grassland specific. There's a lot of rare Lepidoptera, so moths and butterflies, and other insects that rely on these grassland habitats. And I'll go into some more detail about each of those species that you might be interested in. But I think it's kind of an undervalued and underlooked at habitat type. So if you're not on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, where a lot of grasslands are, it might be of a less familiar habitat for you. So now we're going way back in time to start. Why do we have grasslands? Why do we care about them and how are they created? So I'm gonna start. I had to show you that kind of cool picture of what they look like before we get into these like how does a grassland come to be? And what I want you to see, the reason I'm showing the glacier to start with is to really kind of frame, this area around Nantucket Sound, how these areas were created, how our islands were created by our last glaciation. So this is a cartoon example of the Laurentide ice sheet. And hopefully you can see my cursor. You can see Nantucket in the very center, as it should be. The vineyard is a little bit to the west. And you can see this basically is the terminal impact of the glacier. But what I also want you to see is this little call-out box that shows the glacier. Then under the glacier is meltwater, and then there's the moraine. So the terminal moraine is where the glacier basically ended in terms of pushing sediment. And the outwash plain, which is after the kind of other side of that moraine, is where the glacial meltwater is melting and it's bringing silt and sediment, and it's just this outwash plain. It's a big, huge plain. And that is what we see south of the last glacial extent. And then all of these little orange dots that I have put on here are areas of remnant sandplain grassland habitat. So aside from this really kind of funky one up in southern Maine, all of the grassland habitat, Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, southern Cape Cod, are all basically, where that terminal moraine is. And that is part of the creation of the sandplain grassland habitat. And then this map, sorry, I gotta move my screen. This map is from, is kind of a paper that's in development by Mike Whittemore, who is one of our members of our Sandplain Grassland Network, where we're looking at all the remnant Sandplain grasslands and what the commonalities are in the ecoregion. So when we say an ecoregion, it's this ecological area that has similar characteristics. So you would expect some somewhat similar botanical representatives. So they're similar soil. So a lot of these are part of the outwash plain, and they're climatically similar, being in a maritime climate. So all these little orange dots, there are current sandplain grassland habitat is existent. So throughout Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket has an abundance. And so you can see this really does match what that terminal moraine was. So all of these similarities, the similarities among all these locations are sandplain grassland habitat has nutrient poor, sandy soil that's well drained. And then they're most primarily in a maritime climate area. What do we have next? Oh yeah, there's Nantucket. And so here's just a few visual representations. They do look pretty different, but there's some similarities. So Kennebunk, Maine, is the kind of more northernmost unique of our sandplain grassland habitats. This is during peak Liatris, which is the New England blazing star blooming. This is a picture from Martha's Vineyard, one of the Nature Conservancy properties. And then we had Hempstead Plains in Long Island, which we visited several years ago. And what you can see, they're all, sandplain grassland habitat is low growing. I don't have any pictures of the soil, unfortunately, but it is like, sandy, nutrient poor soils that are well drained. And those of us on the Cape and Islands kind of know that soil type. And so when you have kind of a terrible soil that doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it, there aren't a lot of things that can grow there. So the things that grow there are very specialized for that habitat type. And so just some of the characteristic species of these grasslands, we have little bluestem grass, which is Schizocarium scoparium. That's one of the most common ones on Nantucket. In this middle picture of Martha's Vineyard, that's kind of the dominant grass, is like has a purpley blue hue to it. You see it kind of flowering like in this lower picture in the fall, excuse me, late summer, fall. In our area on Nantucket, especially at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, the sickle leaf golden aster is this low growing daisy-like yellow flower that's really loves open sandy spots. It grows right along the trails in many areas. I know for those of you in the New York area that it is a species of, I don't know its listing, but it is a species of concern in New York State. It's not listed in Massachusetts, and it's quite abundant on the islands for sure. Um, we call this a grassland, but we also do have shrubs, low-growing shrubs. So bearberry or Arctostaphylos uva ursi is one of our slow-growing woody shrubs. So it's a ground cover, excuse me, sometimes called mealy plum, or the native name for it is kinnikinnick, where it's a low-growing woody shrub that is characteristic of these habitats. So despite this, while it's a grassland, and so it's grass dominated by name, of course, there is still a mix of grasses, forbs, which are non-woody flowering plants, and then some often lower growing shrubs. And then I mentioned before the heathlands, and heathlands have really similar species complex, but they might have slightly more woody plants. So there might be more representation of something like bearberry. And then we have one of my favorites, goat's rue. This is one of the forbs or non-woody flowering plants. It's a member of the pea family, so it has little pea pods. But goat's rue is another one that grows in these like kind of path edges, very sandy edges. Sometimes further in from the path, but in kind of little open sandy spots. And so when we get to Nantucket grasslands, I'm going to be focusing more on Nantucket, of course. On this map on the right, this was from a few years ago, so maybe a few more here and there. You can see the Sandplain Grasslands and coastal heathlands of Nantucket are everything in green. And so if you look at it quickly, sorry, I keep moving the zoom the zoom screen of everyone. When you look at it quickly, you see that the bigger acreages, so the bigger extents of green, are all along the coast. They're all along the south coast, and then there's where Linda Loring Nature Foundation is on the top. There's a kind of a big blob, and then there's pockets throughout the middle moors, maybe around cranberry bogs, and there's pockets in other places of grasslands, but the majority are along the south coast. And I failed to put the number up here, or I don't know it off the top of my head, but Nantucket in particular, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard collectively have the most Sandplain grassland habitat of anywhere. We have some of the largest acreages too of extant. So while Long Island has some really high quality grasslands, they're kind of fragmented a little bit more and spread out, where we have some really big acreages. And once again, here's a picture from smooth hummocks in the late summer, fall. So I think a lot of my photos are from late summer, fall, because that's peak of aster season. So the little daisy-like flowers where we have a high aster diversity here on Nantucket. And there's like a lot of different diverse colors and leaf shapes and sizes in the fall. So I think I take a lot more pictures in that time of year. All right, so just going back to what are some of our dominant species? So here, and I apologize in advance, I put some of these slides together from previous presentations, and I'm just now noticing some of them have more common names, and some of them have common names and scientific names. And hopefully that's not too confusing. If anyone wants to have specific questions about plants, I'm happy to answer any of them. But here are some of our dominant grass-like plants. So we have, once again, little bluestem is the one in the middle, Schizocarium scoparium. We have Carex pennsylvanica, which is Pennsylvania sedge. That's one of our most common at Linda Loring. And Danthonia, which is like I forget, the common name is like poverty oak grass or something like that. Sometimes I'm not great with common names. This is what the seed head looks like. Sometimes when you look at a grassland, you see grass and you're like, oh, it's grass. But when you look closer, there's a lot of diversity among individual plants. So I know if you look quickly, you can see that the Carex, the first one, is a lighter green color. It grows in these thick mats and provides a really dense ground cover. The little blue stem in the middle is a bunch grass. It can grow quite tall, so it's a great one to use in a yardscaping if you're wanting to include some more native plants. And then these are just three of the kind of dominant ones that we see a lot on Nantucket, but there's a huge amount of grass diversity and that graminoid diversity that includes grasses, sedges, rushes, and other kind of graminoid-like things. And once again, forbs being non-woody flowering plants. Oh, I put growth through in here again. I just really love these sweet flowers. The pea-like flowers, Tephrosia. And then we have some of our asters. So in the fall, we see a lot of yellow asters. So this is one of our Euthymia species, which is flat-topped yellow. No, not flat. This is flat-topped white aster is the white one. This is grass-leaved goldenrod um, and then we also have, I didn't put any photos of goldenrods in here, but we have a lot of goldenrod diversity as well in the fall time. And then some of our dominant woody species of the grasslands, which are our kind of smaller shrubs, would be black huckleberry, which is the first one here, lowbush blueberry, and once again, bearberry. Those are some of the ones that are the kind of the most common when we see. And it makes sense that we have these kind of lower growing areas. Some of them are clonal species, like the huckleberry. And that really is important as we get into the next stage, which I'll talk about, is management of these plants. And just because I want to show more grassland plants, um, okay, now I feel bad. I do work for Linda Loring, but I feel like a lot of my high flowering photos are of smooth hummocks. So Go Land Bank has done a great job with some of their management. And so there's a lot of beautiful flowering plants in this picture. So bushy rock rose is another species that's really important in these landscapes. It has buttery yellow flowers, but I chose to put this picture in because I think it's a kind of a sweet um, low growing forb that kind of has it was a state listed plant. It is technically they're going through some of the genetics of this plant right now, I believe. So it's not currently on the list, but the state is still interested in its locations. We have Baptisia or Eastern Wild Indigo. We don't have bird's foot violet so much on our property at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. It's more center and eastern parts of the island, but bird's foot violet is another really important forb in a lot of these grassland and disturbed areas. And then another late purple aster, Symphiatricum patens, is another, once again, this daisy-like aster plant that is ubiquitous in certain parts of grasslands in the fall on Nantucket. All right, so I don't want to show too many data slides, but I thought I wanted to kind of emphasize the importance of these grasslands. So it's not just like, oh, they're beautiful fields to walk through of wildflowers. They're actually very important habitats. So this figure is from the state of Massachusetts. It's actually from the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, and it's habitats and associated species of greatest conservation need is this figure. And so you can look by habitat, how many quote unquote important species in the state are in each habitat. So I just put a red box around where Sandplain Grasslands fall. They're in this dry grassland and heathland category. So there's 109 species that either fall, excuse me, under the species of greatest conservation need and or are listed by the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. And so this isn't just plants, it's plants, birds, reptiles, insects, anything that would fall under this category. And so if you look to even not just the sheer number as 109, but it's pretty high among other habitat types. So other habitat types that beat it would be woodlands and barrens, oak forests and woodlands, and then we get into wetland habitat. So floodplains and wet meadows are kind of on par with some of those rare species. And so it's a significant habitat for rarity within the state. So there's a lot of protections, there's a lot of priority habitat. And in fact, Sandplain Grasslands in our state are listed as an S1 habitat type, which is critically imperiled. And so even if it's not a rare species you're looking at, the fact that it's in the Sandplain Grassland habitat means that it's protected because it's in a priority habitat situation. And so there's different levels of protection based on the labeling of either the species or the habitat type, but it just goes to show that at the state level, this is a highly valued habitat type. Sandplain grasslands are considered not only this critically imperiled, they're a globally rare habitat. We don't like to say, but we do often say. And 90% of the world's Sandplain grassland habitat occurs just in our area of Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and south coast of Massachusetts. Some of the species, I mean, I'm a plant ecologist, so I'm going to keep showing you plants. Some of the rare species of the Sandplain grassland are New England blazing star, as I mentioned before, which is a species of special concern. We have the yellow thistle, which is a watch list species. So a watch list species in our state means that there is concern that it's that we're losing individuals or we're losing populations rather, but that they require more data. The state requires more data. So we've been collecting data on Cirsium hirigillum, this yellow thistle. It is quite ubiquitous on Nantucket right now. It's a really important plant for pollinators, and so we're kind of keeping an eye on it. And then Eastern silvery aster is this beautiful purple aster here. It's like a big spike of aster flowers. That's a state listed endangered species. And Nantucket has some of the only few remnant populations. And then butterfly milkweed is actually not listed. I just really love that we needed a bright pop of orange, right, for this photo. One thing that I failed to mention so far when we were looking at maps of the Sandplain grassland habitat was, why are these species so rare? So the habitats are rare, the species are rare. If you are around Nantucket or live on Nantucket and you are walking on trails through grasslands, because we do have so much, we sometimes take them for granted. We see a lot of these species that I'm saying are protected species. We see many numbers of them. So, for example, this New England blazing star plant, which is a species of special concern listed by the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. This species might occur all throughout smooth hummocks, along the trails by my Comet Golf Course, for example. But it occurs in those numbers here, but not in other areas. So if at the state level, the state will consider it a rare species because we have lost so much of it in other parts of the state. And I might come back to that again when we talk about management. So for grassland bird species, a lot of these are birds that are dependent on some part of their life cycle for grasslands. So at least 7 of the bird species of conservation interest in Massachusetts are highly dependent, whether it's for nesting or overwintering or resting during migration. So they're grassland obligates of some sort. Some 5 bird species that are uncommon or declining are associated with grasslands. Sometimes their hunting territory is related to grassland habitat. So a lot of the work that we do to manage grasslands is also in the name of grassland birds. So we want to have available habitat of significant acreage so that we can provide, nesting grounds. We can provide habitat for hunting for these hawks and birds of prey and things like that. So these are just a few of photos that I put up here of grassland birds in our area. I'm not the bird biologist. I can answer some bird questions, but we have multiple people on staff at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation who are happy to answer questions about birds. For example, northern harriers are one of my favorites. They are a bird of prey that is regularly hunting over grassland habitat. They nest on the ground in a mix of grassland shrubland habitat, so kind of like an open grassland pocket among some low shrubs. And so we see them all year round, but this is the time of year where they're starting courtship displays. They'll be finding nesting locations soon. They're a state-listed endangered species primarily because of their ground nesting. They've lost habitat and they're all vulnerable to predators. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of those predators on Nantucket. Um, excuse me. Let me just grab a little water. Short-eared owls I put on here basically to kind of hope that I get to see one again soon. Short-eared owls have really similar habitat requirements of northern harriers, and so when I was first on Nantucket in the late 90s, we would see both of them sort of in unison in some of these grassland areas like Head of the Plains on Nantucket that's owned by the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. Um, the short-eared owls have moved their populations further north, so we very rarely um, see them on the islands now. And I'm actually not sure the last time one was seen. I'm sure someone can write in and tell me when the last short-eared owl was seen, or but they certainly haven't nested in some time. The flip side of that is I have purple martins on here. Purple martins have not nested on Nantucket historically, perhaps long, long ago, but in the last 100 years, they have not nested on Nantucket until last summer. And so we put up at Linda Laurie Nature Foundation some purple martin gourds. And so we've been encouraging purple martin nesting behavior. So a lot of any of the birds that are cavity nesting birds might need additional support, like purple martin gourds or tree swallow nest boxes or something along those lines. And so that's some of the things that we do to um, help assist the populations of grassland species, whether they're migratory or nesting species. And then insects. So I'm not an entomologist, but there are a lot of insects of interest in the on the species of greatest conservation need in our state. And many of them are grassland, either obligates or grassland dwellers. And these are a few that I'm more familiar with that I put up here. The purple tiger beetle, there's a lot of tiger beetles that are, I think a lot of these are sand specific. So some of things like the tiger beetle and the burying beetle are really, it's about the substrate. So the kind of sandy soil aspect of some of this. And then some of the others like the Lepidoptera, so the moths and butterflies are maybe more focused on the host plants. So the plants that make up the Sandplain grassland habitat. These are species that I'm more or less familiar with, I think, on Nantucket. Chain dot geometer is a state, these are all state listed species, by the way. And I don't have the marks on here, which ones are endangered versus threatened, but they're easy to find on our state list if you are interested. The chain dot geometer is one that is quite ubiquitous on Nantucket. So when the caterpillars are out, which are these little kind of inchworms, they are all over huckleberry, scrub oak, lowbush blueberry. So they're on all these kind of low shrubs of the grassland habitats. And then they become kind of interesting looking moths, but I like them as caterpillars. So I added the caterpillar picture here. The American burying beetle is kind of the coolest story on Nantucket. It is not my story to tell. I can tell you a little bit about it, but it's really been a combination between the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, the Maria Mitchell Association, and Roger Williams Zoo in Rhode Island, where we have now on Nantucket one of the last extant populations of American burying beetle in the Middle Moors, where beetles have been reintroduced that were extinct here. And so if you look at the Nantucket Conservation Foundation website, there's a lot more information about this project that's been going on for more than a decade at this point. But the early successional, which I'll get into in a sec what that means, but the habitats around grasslands and heathlands are really important for a lot of these insects. We were also part Nantucket, so Linda Laurie Nature Foundation and the Nantucket Conservation Foundation were part of this large regional pollinator project that wrapped up a few years ago, looking at barrens, so like basically dry soil habitats. So they included Sandplain grassland habitat, heathlands, and some pine scrub barrens, and there were sites all throughout the Atlantic coastal plain. And one of the take-homes of this large 5-year study was that Nantucket, in particular, between like all of the transects that we collected data on, had some of the highest native bee diversity in our area. And what was so interesting to me to learn as a land manager of this area was that a lot of our ground nest, our native bees that are pollinating all these native wildflowers and plants are actually ground nesting. So they make small burrow holes in the sand. And so these open sandy pockets, like I have a picture of here, are really important for the species. This is just um, uh, one type of bee. Sorry, I can't remember what the common name is for this bee. This one very specific, this bee that was found in one of our transects at Linda Loring is a coastal specific bee. And we also did moth sampling along with this project. And what we're finding is areas with sandier soil and more open conditions, so these open grassland habitats support higher levels of bee abundance and species richness. And the more diverse your pollinators are, the more diverse plants that you can have, or vice versa, they support each other. So we're increasing overall biodiversity by supporting the grassland plants and the grassland pollinators. And so one of the things I mentioned was an early successional habitat. So um, we consider grasslands early successional habitats, and that's important for knowing that for how we protect and manage and care about these habitats. So this little graphic here is a graphic. I think I got it from a textbook of early successional habitats. So what we find is if we never did anything, if these like a grassland habitat was never disturbed in any way, it was just as is, it would go through what's a natural process of succession. So you start with these annual plants and it gets into more perennial plants and grasses. And then it would over time become shrubbier and shrubbier. And then those shrubs would give way to some softwood trees and pines. And then we'd see more hardwood trees, and that's kind of the climax of succession is these kind of late stage trees. And in many parts of New England, we have more of these climax forests, or we might be in the softwood pine forest stage. But as we look on Nantucket, or not just Nantucket, as we look at these grassland and these heathland habitats, we're in this early successional phase. So if we are valuing these sandplain grassland habitats because we want to protect this diversity of species and the species complexes and all these rare species, then we need to find a way to keep in the early successional stage. So we say this is an early successional habitat. We need to keep it in that stage. And the way to keep it in that stage is that we need some kind of disturbance. So historically, before people were managing land, which I mean is thousands of years ago, there was more natural types of disturbance, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then over time, people are part of the landscape and have been for millennia. People have disturbed the landscape in different ways. So sometimes it's cutting trees and dragging them across the landscape. That's a disturbance. Sometimes it's a hurricane. Sometimes it's wind. Sometimes it's fire that starts either naturally or on purpose. So there's lots of different ways that we talk about disturbance. And so as a land manager, we want there to be disturbance to if our goal is keeping up these early successional habitats. Okay, so this is my silly graphic. Bringing it back to Nantucket Sound is that these squiggly lines, I shouldn't have made them blue because blue makes me think of water. But going back to remembering that the Linda Loring Nature Foundation is here, is that if you can see my cursor, that blue circle. And our prevailing winds in the off season and even other parts of the year are these northeast winds. And we have really significant winds that come through the sound. And it's these offshore winds that are coming through over the ocean. They're bringing wind, the wind is bringing salt spray with it. And sometimes during storm events, that salt spray can be very significant onto the landscape. And so, and this has been happening since Nantucket was formed. It happens in many other areas of maritime climates, but it really shapes the types of habitats, the types of plants, and the habitats um, that are growing in these areas. And so this is a regular disturbance of wind and salt spray that happens daily, But then when you get storm events, then you get more significant wind and salt spray and sometimes sand coming up into those landscapes. Oh, yeah, okay. So we'll come back to wind and salt spray, I guess, a little bit later. And so when we think of like managing and relying on these disturbance types, there's a few different types of tools in the toolbox. And this is by no means exhaustive of the types of management that people do, but this is just a few things, kind of the main things that I see that people use generally when we think of grassland management. So selective removal is one I'm going to show you a little bit more because that's what we do a lot at Linda Loring or have, where you're removing something very specific. In this example on the top is trees. Grazing is one that's been used a lot. I didn't want to get into the whole history of grazing, but the act of sheep grazing, so eating the forbs and grasses themselves, as well as the impact of hooves and just livestock being on the landscape, has been a disturbance in and of itself, and historically was when there was more of grazing commons on Nantucket and this on the vineyard as well. So grazing historically shaped a lot of these habitats. So different organizations, including the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, have explored using sheep present day to kind of recreate some of those grassland habitats. It was not, not as successful. There's some great literature that went into the research that was done on grazing, both on Nantucket and in the vineyard, and some other places too. So if you have questions about that, I can answer best I can, but there's a lot of literature to look through. I think the most common now is mowing and brush hogging, so basically cutting a lot of the vegetation to kind of reset that succession. And then prescribed fire is widely used all throughout the Northeast and has a history of use here on Nantucket. It's getting more and more difficult to use fire for many reasons, one of which is our drier and hotter summer seasons make it not safe to use fire in some instances. And so, as a land manager, broadly, both on Linda Loring Nature Foundation property itself, but also through the Sandplain Grassland Network, we're looking at what are the threats to our Sandplain Grassland habitats. So I mentioned this middle one, the top middle of like ecological succession, so just increasing of woody species that we want to reset that. But we're also looking at habitat loss, development, fragmentation. It's a lot easier to develop a flat outwash landscape where there's grassland than a forest. So that's where we've had a lot of habitat loss over time. Invasive species. So this picture on the right is a spotted knapweed, which is a grassland invader. There's many grassland invaders. So those are issues. And then below the green line are kind of climate specific issues that we're facing for Sandplain grassland management. And this is true for many other habitats as well, but habitat loss specifically due to erosion, seawater inundation as we've gotten more sea level rise and storm surge, and then added climate impacts that are kind of secondary climate impacts, like so range shifting species, changes to their management tool availability. But we as land managers can really focus on these top three because I can't really stop erosion myself if I'm planning for the Linda Loring Nature Foundation property, and I can't necessarily stop the warmer temperatures and drought conditions, but those are things we manage for. But I can take more action on these top three things. And I'm not going to go into details on all of them, but that's just to give you an idea of how we, as managers, think about some of these threats. And so targets, we have to have targets for our management so we know what we want to do. As I said, we want to reduce woody cover, we want to increase native biodiversity, we want to increase graminoids and forbs, so the kind of grassier and more wildflower dominant aspects of the habitat. We want to reduce non-native species as best we can. And then we want to protect or increase the populations of rare and threatened species that we know about. And so I'll give you a few examples from Linda Loring and what we've done there, and then show you some fun. I love management pictures because I love before and after. So here once again is the Linda Loring Nature Foundation property. In this picture, everything green is our coastal heathland and Sandplain grasslands. So remember I said it was about 53%. And on top of that are these little blue triangles and blue polygons, and those are where we had a non-native invasive species kind of coming in. So that was a Japanese black pine. And basically what I want you to see is that the blue bits are on top of the green bits, so that the pines were invading the grassland habitat and really changing the landscape. And so this is what some of that look like. You can see in the background these huge, like kind of forested swaths. Those are all Japanese black pine, which is a non-native invasive species. And what I want you to go think about, and I don't remember if I kept this slide in, but when I showed the picture of the wind coming from the northeast and the wind like really shaping these habitats, if that wind hits this wall of pines, it's going to have an impact, right? So, this wall of pines is really stopping a lot of that wind and salt spray. So, even though the pines themselves we're getting rid of, we're really interested in how it's going to shape the overall landscape. So, in 2018, we had some funding from the state wildlife habitat management grant program to conduct this work. And so we removed a significant acreage of trees. And since 2018, we've been doing a number of different pockets or patches rather of Japanese black pine throughout the property. Oh, and we have a lot of intern and volunteer groups who've helped with successive pine removal. Oh, I did put this in. Okay, so remember the wind. If you have a wall of pine trees right here, that's going to stop that wind. It's going to have an effect further south on the populations. So then these next series of the next series of images are just a bunch of before and after because they're my favorite thing. We worked really hard to remove these pines. So we restored the natural wind and salt spray regimes. We've been recording a lot of data on the habitat and recovery. And it also reduces our fire risk. I didn't mention that, but a lot of these pines are standing dead and kind of dried up, and they do become a fire hazard in some of these areas. So you can see the before on the right-hand side and the after, several years after, where you can see a few stumps in the foreground, but basically you see this open grassland habitat with some small shrubs in the foreground. This was an area that started in 2018. So these are all photo points. So they are from the same exact location. It doesn't look like it because it's kind of mind-blowing, but you can see we start with a mix of live and dead pines, grassland below, and then this is right after management, so you can see some of the stumps. You can see low-growing vegetation. But I want you to pay attention to the rain gauge in the corner because that's a good eye marker for the next step. This is the first growing season after, where a lot of the grassland, the grassland diversity that was in the soil really just came up and filled in. And then this was just this fall. I want to take a 5 year since. Actually, no, it's more than 5 years. 7 years since picture. So you can see there are some shrubs coming in, but there is quite a bit of diversity. And I didn't want to like show you all my bazillions of data slides, but basically what we're seeing is we are having a grassland diversity recovery where we're having a lot more more forbs and grass diversity and lower, like no more pines and low woody diversity. So similarly, standing live and dead pines, and then post management. This is like one of our stunning areas. I just love this spot. Also in this spot, after we removed significant acreage of pines, we had a flush of pink lady slipper orchids, which are really like acidic soil. So they were really relishing the open habitat and the acidity of the needle layer. So we do still have lady slippers coming up in this area 7 years later, what is it, 7 years later. And so that's been exciting in that spot to record those lady slipper orchids. So as we moved through time and we started taking more and more pines out, our recording became a little more sophisticated. So now you can see the compass bearing and everything. Really just these are our photo points. So this is a path that goes through one portion of the property. It was lined on both sides by Japanese black pines. This was right after management, so it looks like a tornado went through, but we like disturbance in these areas. So this was February of 2023. So this was the first growing season where you can see there's still a lot of detritus on the ground, but there is vegetation surrounding. And you can see grassier, grassier. This was August of 2025. This was part of the drought year. So it doesn't look as fabulous as it did right away, but we are seeing a lot of vegetation filling in. Okay, I'm just going through these because I love them so much. So this is really similar. You can see in the background there are some open pockets, but open pockets that are sandy are great for those native pollinators. So keep that in mind. That's, part of the diversity here that we're going for. Um, there you go. This was 2024 and this 2025. All right, I'm almost done. And then another part of the management of these pines and really opening the grassland was to look at our species of greatest conservation need, especially our rare species. So this is one example I'm going to show you. So Sandplain blue-eyed grass, Scissorhynchium fuscatum, is a species of greatest conservation need. It's also a species of special concern on the endangered species list for Massachusetts. And before cutting the pines, this one area that you can see, all these pinkish purple little dots were occurrences of sandplain blue-eyed grass. We know it's quite common in these areas. It likes disturbance. It's a sandplain grassland specialist. So this was in 2022. Pines were cut in 2023. And then the first growing season, we did the same surveys we did before, and we saw a lot of sandplain blue-eyed grass coming up right in the middle of the areas where we had cut pines. And then flash forward to 2025. Once again, we're seeing big portions of the center of that area, which had been cut with pines, filling in with sandplain blue-eyed grass. Now, we don't think just because we cut the pines that they're suddenly there. They were in the seed bank, we believe, all along, and it was really opening up the canopy to light and the disturbance of the cut that really enabled these to grow in. So not only are we seeing forbs and graminoids coming in, but our species of greatest conservation need are also filling in these grassland areas. So we're, restoring these grassland habitats. And so this is what it looks like on the ground. All these purple flowers, it's a member of the iris family. They're small, but they're little irises. This grassland habitat is just a swath of purpley blue during late May, June for these guys. But we also are able to see our endangered northern harriers are now using this location for hunting and nearby nesting, where they would not have been able to do this when it was covered in pine trees. We have eastern towhees are also nesting in the on the edges of this habitat. Killdeer, which are a grassland specialist bird, also ground nesting in this area. So we're just seeing that this habitat is in recovery and is becoming its true sandplain grassland self again. And just to end with a few beautiful pictures, this one is a Nantucket Conservation Foundation property. This is a Nantucket Land Bank property, and you can see they're both grasslands in the fall, but they have a different just view based on their different species diversity in that particular property. And then here we have the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. We have a lot of little blue stem in the foreground, and then a lot of goldenrods in the background of this plant of this picture. And so I'm just encouraging everyone to just go out and explore some of these habitats where you can. We also, if you're interested in kind of taking a deeper dive in some of this, the Sandplain Grassland Network website has a lot of very specific management actions, stories about management from different case studies from different properties in the area. And so it's a great reference library too. And so I'd encourage you to check that out. And with that, I just want to end with, some tips of what you can do, whether you want to plant more native species, to encourage native pollinators, provide habitat for birds and wildlife where possible, support the various conservation organizations that work in these areas, limit herbicide and insecticide use because what you spray on your yard can affect a lot of these conservation lands that we all care about. And respect signage. I mean, we have trails and we like to keep people on trails where possible, not only to protect the species, but also to, protect yourself from ticks and poison ivy and things like that. And then, as I said, explore these habitats. We want people to appreciate them. You want care about a species or care about a habitat when you get to explore it. And you can join us for a walk. I know the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, we have Our next walkout on our property is March 27th. We also have one on April 10th. And then we have our bird trips will be also, I don't remember when the next one is, but there's throughout the starting in March and April. Many of our other conservation colleagues have public walks throughout their properties to showcase the flora and fauna there as well. And you can find all of that information about our walks which are all free. You can sign up for everything at llnf.org and check out the calendar of all the events that we have. You can follow us on social media so you can stay up to date on what we have going on. And if you do visit our website, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter too, because then you can get like the first stab at registering for some of these events. So thank you everyone so much, and I'm happy if we have any time to answer any questions that you might have about Sandplain Grasslands or management.
That was great, Sarah. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions for
Okay.
you. One question is, do all of these plants and flowers rely on the weather to be nice, to be in full bloom come springtime? I ask because the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. are so sensitive to climate and affect their peak times every year.
That's a great question. I think it's yes and no. There's a mix of both, right? So sorry, my I'm realizing I'm kind of blurry because my light is fading. Um, I think that in general, these are plants that grow in these kind of conditions, like heavy wind, heavy salt spray, really poor soils, are very hardy. So they're kind of tough species. They have to withstand like a certain amount of wind and kind of not great conditions. So in general, I think they are a little bit more rugged, if I will say that. The cherry blossoms that we have here, so the native cherries, which are Prunus serotina, will not they don't flower at the same time as the ornamental cherries like in Washington, D.C. And they are a little bit hardier. And so I think it's a lot of the ornamental plants that are maybe not as used to our conditions. Like they do grow here, they do well, and like great street trees and are beautiful. But I think I hear what you're saying about like the sensitivity of the flower petals and whether or not they're going to bloom. Um, I will say, even though they're hardy physically, in that sense, they are all subject to not sea level rise, but aspects of climate change. So we're seeing our springtime temperatures happen earlier and earlier. And so some species are able to respond really easily and like, yep, it's warm, let's go. Like lowbush blueberry is really great at leafing out, flowering early, kind of like jumps on it. But other species are kind of slow in that. So it really depends on species, like which ones are more trackable to the climate change.
And what about this season, which has been, so snowy and so cold the first
Yeah,
time in quite a number of years? How is that? How do you anticipate that's affecting everything?
that's a great question. I was out today with a group of college students looking at our plants and kind of having this discussion about kind of the timing of our plants. And they're still like closed up shop for the winter, basically. All the buds are really tight and kind of like, nope, not yet. And so I think what we're actually seeing is um, it's kind of like going back to historic normal right now. And any one year is like can be anything. And we've been seeing successive early springs. So I think it'll feel late to us who've been living through early springs, but it's kind of like normal.
Okay.
And I mean, we track that. So, the National Phenology Network is an organization that tracks early spring, and we kind of look at their maps and see what they say, and we can report back, I guess.
Okay, so this question is going to challenge me
Okay.
because it says Autochthonous Opuntia humifusa jutting out among the poison ivy on the dunes of Cotu and Great Point. What is the status? And my question is, how do you actually say that?
Apuntia humifusa is our prickly pear cactus. So,
Okay,
did you
that would
know
have been
that
an easier way
Nantucket
to ask.
Yeah, did you know that Massachusetts has a native cactus? So the native cactus, Opuntia, is prickly pear cactus. It grows on Nantucket. It grows in Cotu, which is the barrier beach. So I didn't include it today because I was talking more about grasslands, but definitely a really important plant of our coastal dune systems. Recently, the state proposed splitting it into two species based on realizing that we actually have two separate species of cacti, and everyone was calling it humifusa, and now I can't remember the other one. It's basically if you look at the thorns and the flowers are how you tell the difference between the two. I don't, off the top of my head, know if any status change, if that resulted in any status change. But I think both, my assumption is that both species are still on the Massachusetts endangered species list. And they're both doing well on Nantucket because where they grow is protected property.
Okay. This one I can pronounce, I think. Do you have a conservation and management plan to prevent secondary succession?
Oh, that's a good question. So, every individual property has its own management plans, right, and goals. I think instead of like a broad scale, we don't want secondary succession at all. It's really dependent on where on the property. So if we have like we're valuing our grasslands and we want to expand and grow our grasslands in some areas, then yes, we would have a management goal to prevent secondary succession. But in other areas where we have more mature forests on the island, there might be that's the goal is to maintain those more mature forests or those pine forests if it's like white pine or native pitch pine. There's a lot of work broadly being done on the island right now on our native pitch pine habitat. So kind of uh, for forest health, doing some understory management. So it's really dependent on like the goals of any one organization and property. But yeah, that is part for preventing or limiting secondary succession is part of some of the management plans.
Okay. Another question. Are the moors the same as the sandplain grasslands?
Yeah, so the moors, the middle moors of Nantucket is an area. So it's the central big area of Nantucket, kind of on the um, eastern end, middle to eastern end. And sandplain grasslands are a part of the middle moors. So sandplain grassland is a habitat type that occurs in many areas. And so when we say the moors, the middle moors on Nantucket, sandplain grasslands are part of that. So in other parts of the world, moors are a name of a habitat type. Like if I think of like Wuthering Heights or something, and
Right,
there's like
right, exactly.
the moors are like a really similar habitat type of this like heathland community. So it can get interchangeable sometimes, I understandably.
Okay.
I hope that was clarifying.
Yeah, I think it was. Okay. Helen is asking, what is the impact of deer on this habitat?
That's another, these are great questions. So deer have a few different types of impact. I know Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard have some of the highest deer densities in our state. So we have some of the most significant deer impact generally. Deer are primarily browsers, so they eat a lot of our shrubs. And at Linda Loring, if you walk on our trail, you can see where they like shape some of the shrubs because they're lazy and they just walk along the edges. So definitely for shrubs. So that's like one impact. We do have, because, and I say it's one impact sort of flippantly because we have so many deer that it is a significant impact. The other thing is that they do preferentially eat certain species. So some of our rare species are significantly impacted by deer. So there's Nabilis serpentaria, lion's foot is a species, a forb, a wildflower that the deer love to eat. So it's really hard to maintain it in the open wild. It grows best in the grassland within Nantucket Airport because it's fenced.
Oh, that's
So that is one
interesting.
of the remnant populations. Um, the New England blazing star, which is that tall purple spike flower I showed, on our property at Linda Loring, we have a few small populations of it, but the deer eat it all the time. Like every year they eat it. So we have kind of tried to fence it out, and then we fenced it out for a few years, and it worked really well. And then it started to kind of have a diminishing return. So we unfenced it again or opened it up again. So it's kind of the deer have preferential impact. They don't eat things like the sandplain blue-eye grass, those little tiny irises I showed you at the end of the presentation. They don't touch them at all. So they actually have a positive benefit for that plant because they don't eat them, but the disturbance of their, if they're walking through an area, if they just heavily disturb the soil, the plant likes that. The plant likes being disturbed just a bit. It'll kind of respond and grow. So it's overall, the habitat evolved with deer and other grazers. So it does pretty well with deer, but we have so much here, so many deer that it is having an impact.
Okay, couple more questions.
Sure.
Is there any danger of compaction to the soil or damaging plant crowns when using machines to remove the Japanese pines?
That's a good question. We talked about it a lot when the very first year, 2018, where we were doing pine management, we had a big they were all the trees were hand cut with chainsaws, but we had a huge truck come on to do like a chipper to chip everything up, and we had a big dump truck to like put all the chips in. And so there was a lot of machinery. Um, I wasn't as concerned about compaction because they weren't the heaviest of machinery. And then also we know that some disturbance is good. So it wasn't going to be an area the trucks were going to go on again and again and again, continuously. They came on, they did it, and then they left. So I have to say, maybe some of my board members are on here, but I remember that first year when I was like, yes, we're going to do this. We got state money. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. And then it was cut and driven over. It looked horrid that first year. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Kind of like fingers
Be
crossed, it's
patient.
going to be
Yeah.
fine, which is why we collect a lot of data, right, to learn. So in case it didn't come out fine, we know we wouldn't do it again. But it really the where all the trucks were driving, those were honestly some of the areas that rebounded the best because this type of habitat loves disturbance. Um, it's often funny when we do our public nature walks on the trail, and I'll show people a rare species, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm stepping on it! Oh no, I'm stepping on it!" Because they grow right in the middle of the trail. And it's not we made a trail through the population, it's that the population came into the trail because it likes disturbance. And so that's some of the evidence to show that it likes to be, some of these plants really like to be mowed, like they like to be pruned, they like to be kind of cut back a bit. Um, and I don't mean to anthropomorphize them and say they like it, it's just they respond really well.
They're showing their resilience.
Yes, they are very resilient. That's a
There
great
you
way to
go.
say it.
Okay. Okay, last question, which I
Sure.
think is a good one. Who is or was Linda Loring, and when was this property designated a land trust conservation property?
Oh, that's a great question, and thank you so much for asking. Linda Loring was a philanthropist and landowner. She loved the western end of Nantucket, so she was really like loved these habitats around where our property surrounds the north head of Long Pond, and she loved the pond and the vistas around there. So she was someone who really wanted to protect this area. So she was buying up kind of different parcels and piecing them together to kind of protect that one area. So she started doing that in around the 1950s. And then she privately owned it, but didn't develop it. It just had a like a kind of a rough trail on it. And then in 2007 is when our organization, the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, became operational. So that was when they hired an executive director, there was a board, it officially became, we're technically a wildlife sanctuary. And so that's when like the trail was put forth and we started to do educational programs. And so relatively on the Nantucket conservation scene, we're relatively new, but the land has been in existence and as grassland, shrubland habitat for all that time. So, Linda really was instrumental, obviously, in protecting this piece of property, and was really her number one goal with the property was also like educating people, bringing people out to connect people with nature. And so hopefully she's proud of us now. She passed away in 2019. And so, we kind of keep her legacy going with all the education and outreach that we do on the property.
That's wonderful. Well, that's it for questions. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. And if people want to get a hold of you, you shared, I think, your contact information, or
Yes.
they can always contact me to follow up. So very much appreciate your time. And We have a couple of webinars coming up in the next few months. In April, at the end of April, we have a history and a future of land conservation on Cape Cod with Mark Robinson. He's the director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust. And on Thursday, June 4th, we have Coastal Treasures, Seashells and the Stories They Tell with shellfish biologist and author Sandy McFarlane. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. I hope you will visit our website, support us, support the Linda Loring Foundation, and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Audra. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.